I'm Miss Taylor Cruz. I'm doing the project finally. I didn't do the video like we originally thought we were gonna do, so I went with the PowerPoint. But I
That's what
have
always
my three
happens.
friends. I have my three friends here as my witnesses or my audience, quote unquote.
Heck yeah.
Hello.
Hi there.
Sick.
Hi.
So I'm ready to present. Okay.
Awesome. We're excited to see this. He's dying, De La Cruz.
Fire Emblem, Three Houses, and video game narratives. Many people of today's mindset believe in the fact that video games are nothing more than a mindless, ridiculous, and violent fantasy for young men and women of the world. However, what these people don't seem to understand is that many games incite extremely thought-provoking topics through storytelling, much like how a movie, book, or play would present it. Modern education of literature tends to focus on topics of cultural or socioeconomic differences, such as studying the different beliefs and lifestyles of African Americans in Their Eyes Were Watching God, or how race and gender affects power and status in Shakespeare's Othello. These kinds of topics are discussed in certain video games, such as the critically acclaimed Fire Emblem, Three Houses, which presents the struggles of its characters in a manner not seen before in education of English literature. The stories of video games are very much worth studying, as they can provide a much more interactive form of storytelling not seen in written literature or film. Before we get started on the analysis, let's talk a little bit about Three Houses. Three Houses is a tactical role-playing game co-made by the companies Intelligent Systems and Koei Tecmo Games, which is published exclusively by Nintendo and for the Nintendo Switch console on July 26, 2019. At the 2019 Game Awards, an Oscars event for video games, Three Houses won both the Best Strategy Game of the Year and the Player's Choice for Game of the Year. Three Houses is the 16th game in a series that dates all the way back to 1989 with Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon, and the Blade of Light. Three Houses tries its very hardest to blend gameplay and story to create an immersive and emotional experience. The game values human relationships and connections and tries its hardest to make the player care for and grow to love the characters of the game. The characters feel very human, with complex backgrounds and personalities, and the authentic voice acting immerses the player. In the game, if one of your characters die in combat, they are gone. Forever. The game incentives the player to play smart and keep your units alive because of how useful the characters are and the human connection you made with them. Now, with that explanation out of the way, let's delve deeper into how video game narratives are valuable. One hope I have is to put video games into the high school English classroom, and to analyze their stories and how video games allow the literature to be interpreted in a different way than books, plays, or movies. One teacher decided that he wanted to do so with his senior English class, and that teacher is Jonathan Ostenson, who wrote a paper detailing his and his students' experiences with teaching video game narratives. Many valuable points are brought up both in favor and not in favor of his video games. His primary argument in favor of the video game says that there's a place for a purposeful study of video games in today's English classroom because they represent some of the most important storytelling in the 21st century. He constantly alludes to the story of juggernaut video games like BioShock, Mass Effect, and Fallout, and how they feature extensive dialogue, essentially reading the story unfold, and even going as far as to say the entire rationale for playing is provided by the narrative and the problems posed with the storyline, much like Three Houses, and its incentive is to keep you invested in the story and characters. Games like these almost reward the player for working through tough challenges by furthering the story. His second point, albeit a small one, is that video games are a very popular medium among teenagers, especially high schoolers. Some students are not avid readers, at least in terms of books. Keeping them invested in a book is extremely hard, because they need something that keeps engaging them, like a video game. Some of their favorite stories are from video games, and I'm sure studying them in a classroom would keep those kinds of students engaged. His final but also biggest point is that video games offer a new form of perspective we don't typically see, the second person. Some games are explicitly second person, referring to the main character as you, or you have to create an avatar that can represent anyone, while others are a little more subtle, like Three Houses. The main character of Three Houses is Byleth Eisner, who is a mute, avatar-like character that teaches as a professor at the game's main area, Garreg Mach Monastery. Because of Byleth's rather reserved personality, the game gives the player the option of choosing some of Byleth's dialogue, which turns the game from a feeling like a first or third person story into a second person story. Ostenson also brings up how a reader of a typical text can become lost in the world of the book. He or she is ultimately powerless to control the narrative and can only be a spectator. What makes video games different is that some games allow for a branching storyline, like 3 houses. Like the name entails, there are 3 different classes or houses that Byleth can teach. And once that decision is made, the story branches out from the other paths, truly making that decision of which house to teach all the more important. Leaving this story in the hands of the player truly makes the story far more immersive. However, the entire report doesn't praise video games on end. It does have something to say against it. First, not all games are made equal, and the superficial stories like Super Mario or Angry Birds really don't have any meaning behind them. But as discussed earlier, certain video games make narrative and storytelling its primary subject, and the drive to play the game. He also brings up how video games, like film, have visuals that destroy imagination and make the whole experience easier than if they were reading. However, this argument doesn't consider how powerful auditory and visual experiences are compared to imaginary experiences. Along with teaching a new form of storytelling, video games can teach us about critical thinking and perspective, such as how literature discussed in high school English classrooms do. 3 Houses' story delves into major themes of prejudice and oppression, and we can use critical lenses to discuss these themes like other literature. So let's analyze them. The first lens we'll use is Marxist, and see examples of Marxism discussed in 3 Houses. Some characters act as foils for one another, such as Ferdinand and Dorothea. Ferdinand is the son of the Prime Minister of the Empire, while Dorothea is a commoner girl who sings at an opera. And Dorothea is very adamant about her opinions of highborn nobles.
The brains of us common folk are so simple, it should be pretty easy for a big shot noble to sort out.
Very well. I cannot walk away from a challenge. I have no choice but to chance a guess. You are always making fun, calling me a big shot and so forth. Perhaps you think all nobles are... No, it cannot be that simple.
This conversation between the commoner Dorothea and the noble Ferdinand highlights some of the viewpoints that commoners have from nobles of the land, where Dorothea makes fun of Ferdinand for being an arrogant and pompous, while Ferdinand implies he is misunderstood. 3 Houses makes this a theme of how the poor and the rich don't seem to understand each other. The game doesn't try to point out that one social class is better than the other, like how nobles are superior and commoners are the underdogs. They are 2 sides of the same coin that can't see eye to eye. Another pair of characters have similar dialogue, but on a much greater scale. Lawrence is an extremely proud, noble character versus the very humble, commoner Leone, and these personalities clashed hard in their conversations. In one conversation, Leone asked Lawrence to help with some weapon maintenance, but Lawrence refused, following up by saying,
I am a highborn noble. As such, it is my sworn duty to protect the common folk. I have no time for trivialities.
Leone, in a later conversation, heckles Lawrence with a snarky comment.
Hello, Leone. Busy as usual, I see.
Yep, lots to do. Not like you fancy nobles.
3 Houses shows a lot of disparities between the social classes, but the characters do end up respecting each other in the end. 3 Houses character arcs are an interesting study for how they discuss social class through character foil, showing misunderstanding between 2 characters, only to solve their problems and understand and respect one another. The next lens we can use is the cultural lens, and see how 3 Houses addresses different cultures. Some characters, like Claude, face heavy racism that have shaped how those characters view the world. Claude is the product between the love of a Fodlan noblewoman and the Almiran king, so he had heritage from both countries and faced prejudice from both countries' people for being a half-breed of sorts. Fodlan and Almira as countries do not like each other, even as neighboring countries, and even highlighting their differences by darkening the Almiran skin tone. Claude reveals his traumatized childhood to Byleth and the player during their first conversation.
Ever since I was a child, I've always been seen as different from those around me. An outsider of sorts. I've been resented and hated. There have even been attempts on my life. I don't believe I've earned such treatment, but that's how it goes for people like me.
Claude clearly has faced heavy prejudice in his life, and some people in our world can feel that they relate to him, being an outsider and resented for reasons about their origin or skin tone. Even though Claude was a noble from 2 different countries, he still was discriminated against. The game clearly tries to make the player feel bad for him and believe in Claude's goal of uniting the world to end racism. Literally. Another example of prejudice discussed in the game is between Ingrid and Dedu, the latter being someone of the country of Dusker, whose skin tone is that of an African-American man. In their first conversation, Ingrid is rather cold and callous for seemingly no reason, but as it turns out, she has a certain hatred for Duskurians. She reveals that to Dedu, and he only replies with,
There were countless people like you in the capital. People who spat, threw things, insults and stones alike, whenever they pleased. Their anger was natural. I do not begrudge them.
Ingrid's hate for Duscurians came from an event called the Tragedy of Duscur, where the entire Fargus royal family was massacred on a family trip and the Duscurians were to blame. So said a certain pro-war faction of the kingdom. The Duscurians were actually truly innocent, but at the time, these two characters were unaware of that. Among those who were massacred was Ingrid's fiancé, and she rightfully was angry, but her anger was misguided due to a prejudice from the tragedy. Dedue solemnly accepts the prejudice because he sadly believes that his people were at fault for the massacre. Following conversations delve into when Ingrid dates no Dedue more and questions his reasons for not fighting back against prejudice, showing a new side of the culture debate we don't typically see.
So why not speak back against how I and so many others feel? Why not question this unfair prejudice and tell me I haven't the right to hold a grudge against you? If you just speak to me, if you tell me the truth about all of this.
I do not know the truth of it myself. His Highness says the tragedy was not the fault of my people. But just like anywhere, there were many different people in Duscur, some very good, and others very bad. It is not unimaginable that some may have conspired to take part in that wickedness. Perhaps we are merely victims, or perhaps we are regicidal monsters.
Three Houses will constantly show us many different perspectives on a social issue, constantly giving us new ways to think critically, and I believe that is worth committing and studying. Bringing this back into video games as a whole, an analysis like this one just shown are a perfect example of how video games can be an engaging and thought-provoking medium. Teachers in districts should look into more how video games can be studied or look into popular stories and dissect them. Video games are one of the largest sources of pop culture in today's society. Video game stories, like Three Houses, are very special and dear to many students and youths. And showing how those stories could be studied, either via research paper or using the critical lenses, could give these stories a chance. Now is a time better than ever to start looking for the right games to study, not just Three Houses, with just how large of a repertoire there is of incredible stories in video games. Let us use Three Houses as a stepping stone to a far more open and diverse array of study, and let's hope that one day a fan of a certain game will come into class one day and find a true passion in literature study through their favorite pastime. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
That was absolutely wonderful.
Man, I was trying so hard not to laugh at some